We're starting now on Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. Ika de Ramile Nir. We have another lishna, another transmission of Abai. Abai didn't say it out of the top of his hat as a comment on a Mishnah, but rather Abai made his statement in the context of reconciling what seems to be a contradiction between our Mishnah and a Brisa. Ika de Ramile Nir. There are those who raise a contradiction between the Mishnah Tan Sine Abarzel Kosher, but Tanya in the Brisa says Psula. Amar Abai came to answer and reconcile this contradiction. Kan she'rosh shel zeh magil l'tzadikro shel zeh, and kan she'ein rosh shel zeh magil l'tzadikro shel zeh. Now, my friends, we're going to talk about another defective lulav that grows in the valleys. Till now, it's on the mountain. Amarav Marion, Amarav Yeshua ben Levi, V'amilei Tana, Tani Rabba Bar Mori, Yishum Rab Yochanan and Succah. Shtei Moros, Yesh Begay Ben Hinnom, right outside the city of Jerusalem. There's an area called Gay Ben Hinnom. Its name, according to the Gemara in Eruvin Daf Yutes, is borrowed from a discussion about where Gehenna is located. And according to that Mandiom, it's right there. Anyway, we're talking now about two palm trees. And there are dates on the palm trees. And they are located in Gay Ben Hinnom. The Ole Oshan Mibenean, and the smoke from Gehenna rises between them. Really scary because here you're walking out of the base of Mikdash. The first thing they remind you of is Gehenna. It's pretty scary. Or maybe you're on your way into the base of Mikdash. That makes more sense. So the chiddush here of this brisa is that even though these palm trees grow in a valley, it's called in Hebrew a gay, nevertheless, the rainwater is somewhat limited, and certainly the sunlight is blocked by the mountains. But if it has the conditions of the Tzine Har Barzel for kashrut, Abai says that the leaf reaches to the bottom of the next leaf, then it's kosher. And now we're going to discuss the shear, the minimum size of a lulav, and compare it to the minimum size of hadassim and aravos. The Mishnah says lulav sheish bo shlosha tefachim. It would seem from the superficial reading of the Mishnah that if the lulav is 3 tefachim high, that's fine. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel shir hadas v'arava shlosha. But we're making a mistake here. The hadas and the arava, which are on the two sides of the lulav, they are 3 tefachim high. But lulav are ba. But the lulav has to be 1 tefach higher than the hadassim and the aravos. Why is that? This has to do with the mitzvah of nanuim. And when we do nanuim, the lulav, which is the tallest of the 3 minim that are bound together, has to be above the other 2 minim. How high above does it have to be in order to guarantee that you do nanuim? It's got to be 1 tefach higher. Therefore,
it has to be high.
The Gemara has a Kabbalah. This was a tradition that goes back for centuries, that the lulav has to be the tallest of the 3. In fact, the brach itself reflects the fact that everything is sort of tafel to the lulav. So the height, the physical height, is really just a reflection of the status of the lulav, the extent to which that bracha is on the dilos. If you ever get a chance, this is more for a philosophy, but the Torah Tamima has a comment as to why the bracha is al netilas lulav, should be al lekichas lulav. Because the Torah says ulakachtem, you will never find the word netila anywhere in the Bible referring to lulav. It's always lekicha. And he bases himself on a medrash. The medrash says that during Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, not only is there a judgment on Klal Yisrael and the nations, but God actually puts the two, Yaakov and Esav, so to speak, on 2 sides of the scale. And it's only on Sukkot when we go out with the lulav. That's when we know that we were successful and we will continue to persevere despite the anti-Semitism of all the the ice cream manufacturers, etc., etc. Right? So, so the word netila says the Torah Tamima. You'll see that when there's a battle between two nations and one nation is victorious, then it goes out with a flag, and that flag is a sign, a symbol of victory. It's a victory symbol. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the flag, the Medrash says, is netila. Netila means we wave the flag. We don't just, likicha means to lift the flag, but netila means to wave the flag. But all this is because the lulav, everything that is secondary to the lulav. Rav Parnach Omar Rav Yochanan, this is a machlokas. He says that shidro shalu yehi min hadastem yetze min hadastem. It's not enough that the lulav is one tefach taller than hadastem, but the shidra of the lulav has to be one tefach above. Right? So you'll see the shidra, the spine, until it starts splitting into leaves, according to the first daya, which is Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, to get the shear of 4 tefachim, the extra tefach above, you calculate and include the leaves. According to Rabbi Yochanan, on the other hand, it's all in the shidra. The lulav is the shidra. You know, have you ever seen a person walking around with a gigantic lulav? Yeah. So you think it's a man. You haven't. You know, most of us think, oh, he's boasting. You know, he's showing off. But the truth is, he's probably being machbir for Rabbi Yochanan, because the shidra itself has to be 4 tefachim. Can you imagine how tall the lulav is? You're going to get a real tall lulav. I guess if you're tall, you take a tall lulav. Anyway. Now we learned to that Mishnah, lulav sheyesh bo shlosha tefachim kidei lenaneh bo kosher. Now this doesn't make any sense according to anybody, whether you're Shmuel or Rav Yochanan. It sounds like the minimum size of a lulav, the height of a lulav is 3 tefachim. Nobody would say that. Even Shmuel requires 4 tefachim. Rav Yochanan requires a lot more than 4 tefachim. We have to say u kidei lenaneh bo kosher. We have to add the word u, add the vav to the word kidei, and u means that in addition to the shlosha tefachim, you also have to add more in the height of the lulav, kidei lenaneh. Markidisle. According to Shmuel, it means in the leaves of the lulav, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, it means in the shidra of the lulav. Now the Gemara raises a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. By the way, in this particular case, we pass like Shmuel against Rabbi, which is interesting because Rabbi Yochanan is always the, like the final word. Anyway, not here. Toshma, Baisa says shir hadas varova shlosha velulav arba. Now, in the case of hadas and arova, we're not talking about a shidra. And the Brisa mentions now the lulav in the same context. You have 3 tefachim of these and 4 tefachim of that. My lav v'hadi olam. As we consider the leaves to be included in the 4 tefachim, and that's a raya from Shmuel against Rabbi Yochanan. Lo, that's not how we're going to interpret it. Levad mi olim. It means it's got to be 4 tefachim beyond, without calculating the olim, meaning 4 tefachim in the shidra. And again, you may ask, how do you fit that into the language of the Brisa? But the answer is the Brisa is talking about the shir of a lulav. According to Rabbi Yochanan, what is a lulav? A lulav is a shidra. The spine is the shidra. Gufa, shir, hadas, varava, shlosh, lulav, arba, Rabbi Tarfon Omer, bi'ama, bas, chamisha, tefachim. Okay, now, when we calculate tefachim, then it's a ratio to an amma. And there are 6 tefachim in a standard amma. And I can't override the word standard because Rabbi Tarfon is going to introduce a different amma. But when you see the word amma anywhere in Shas, until you know otherwise, you assume it's made up of 6 tefachim. Comes along Rabbi Tarfon, and he says that's not the amma that we're using here in the context of the shear of hadassim, aravos, and a lulav. We're using a different kind of an amma. And there's another kind of an amma, which is an amma that has 5 tefachim. And this is the first sugya in Masechet Erev about the 2 categories of an amma which is a bas shisha tefachim, as opposed to an amma which is a bas hamisha tefachim. And it's very tricky to know which amma is going to be used where. But generally speaking, just so you don't get confused as you go out through Shas, an amma classic is 6 tefachim. Rabbi Tarfon employs the amma of 5 tefachim. Now the Gemara now is going to go back and forth on the following issue: is Rabbi Tarfon coming to be machmir or to be makil? In other words, is he requiring a higher shear or a lower shear? Right now the Gemara thinks it's a higher shear. Why so? Okay, we'll get to that after the very somewhat pejorative comment of Rava. Rava says, Sharalei Lamare, the Rabbi Tarfon, may God give mechila to Rabbi Tarfon. Why? Ashta now, Avo Shlo Shalom Mashkachinon, it's almost impossible for us to find hadassim that have the shear of 3 tefachim, because we're going to have a sugya later on about hadas shota. So it's not common to find a kosher hadas. And now, now Rabbi Tarfon is going to up the ante, and he's going to require not 3 tefachim, but 5 tefachim. He's almost doubling the size of hadas. And basically, he's making it impossible for us virtually to fulfill this mitzvah. God should forgive him for that. Kiyasa Rav Dimi Omar. Now Rav Dimi says, Rava, you misinterpreted Rabbi Tarfon. He was not doubling the size, the minimum shear of a hadas, but rather he agrees that the shear of hadas is 3 tefachim. What Rabbi Tarfon says is that's a different 3 tefachim than the 3 tefachim that you think, which is half of an amma of 6 tefachim. No. It's 3 tefachim in a ratio to an amma of 5 tefachim. So instead of being, let's say, 3 tefachim as a half an amma, you're going to require much more than that. And the Gemara is now going to calculate the mathematics for us. Amma bas shisha tefachim aseusa bas chamisha. Rabbi Tarfon is going to take the amma of 6 tefachim, classic amma, and substitute the amma of 5 tefachim. Semehem shlosha lahadas. Now we need 3 tefachim out of an amma that's made up of 5 tefachim. And what you end up with is, instead of 3/6, you're going to end up with 3/5. Okay, I'll read to you the note because it's somewhat pressed for time, but you'll chap it. I mean, even I was able to understand. He says a 5 tefach amma is created by measuring a standard amma of 6 tefach and then dividing it into 5 equal parts. The hadas must be equal to the length of 3 of these parts. So when Rabbi Tarfon states, quote, the species are measured with an amma of 5 tefachim, end of quote, he means that they must measure 3/5 of an amma, whereas the Tanakama has 3/6 of an amma. So the difference between Rabbi Tarfon and the Tanakama is equal to the difference between 3/6 and 3/5. So it's not such a big deal.
So the amma remains the same. It's just how you divide it up. 5 will...
Correct. If you divide it into 5, then each tefach is going to be a little bit larger, right? And if you talk about 3 tefachim, it's going to be 3/5 of an amma as opposed to 3/6 of an amma. So that's the extra chumrah of Rabbi Tarfon. So you don't have to ask God to forgive him for being machmir to that little amount. And then you have to add another tefach for the lulav. The Gemara actually works out the mathematics here. Tlasa utlasa chumshe. In comparing it to a common amma, which is made up of 6 tefachim, 3 tefachim would be 3/6 of an amma, right? 1/2 of an amma. Now we need 3 3/5 of common tefachim, of standard tefachim. So if the standard 6 tefach amma is divided into 5 equal parts, each segment requires 1 1/5 standard tefachim. Therefore, 3 tefachim is equal to 3 3/5 of standard tefachim. Rashi works this all out. Now the Gemara asks the following question: Kacha de Shmuel ad Shmuel. I have a steer in Shmuel. Hachal my Rav Yudam Shmuel Shir Adas Harav Shlosh, which sounds like Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel is requiring 3 tefachim of a standard amma, 3 common tefachim. But Hasam Amar Rav Huna Amar Shmuel Halacha ki Rabbi Tarfon. Elsewhere, Rav Huna, in the name of Shmuel, accepts the definition of the Amma of Rabbi Tarfon. Where answers lo dak, that Shmuel was rounding it off. And even though he said it was 3 tefachim, really he means it's more than 3 tefachim. It's going to be 3 3/5 tefachim. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, Amar the Amrina lo dak. When do we say that sometimes an Amoral rounded off? That's lechumra. He wants to be machmir a little. He's always giving you leeway and a certain cushion so that you don't violate the law. But lekula mi amrina lo dak. Is he going to tell me 3 standard tefachim is enough when really we need 3 3/5 of the tefach? And therefore, the Gemara says that there was another Amora who brought the tradition from Eretz Yisrael Babel, in addition to Rav Dimi, and that's Ravin. And Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came, he reinterpreted Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon is not the machmir. On the contrary, Rabbi Tarfon was making. You don't need 3 standard tefachim. Less will do. How so? Amma bas chamisha tefachim aseo sashisha. You see where he turned it upside down. Before he said Amma bas shisha tefachim aseo sashisha. Now he's saying Amma bas chamisha tefachim aseo sashisha. So the measure of an Amma is that of only 5 tefachim, which we can divide now an Amma of 5 tefachim into 6 equal parts. So the same am shloshal adas v'ashar lulav kama havi avilahu shrei upalga. It's going to be 2.5 standard tefachim instead of 3. It'll be 2.5. And now sof kasher d'shmuel odak v'aynu l'chumra odak the Omer Rav Huna Omer Shmuel alochik Rabbi Tarfon. So Rav Huna says the name Shmuel, we pass like Rabbi Tarfon, which means that all we need is adas of 2.5 tefachim, and yet Shmuel said we need 3 tefachim by passing like our Mishnah. And lo dak, he was being machmir. Now it's pretty fascinating because la halach, we pass in l'chumra here, and we will passel 2.5 tefachim hadas, where Gemara says that Shmuel passel is like Rabbi Tarfon. 2.5 tefachim would be sufficient. We're up to the Mishnah. Hadas hagazul v'yavesh passel. Just like we saw that if a stolen lulav or a dry lulav was used, you disqualify them. It's the same halachas apply in the case of a hadas. The same requirement. Shal hasherim shal yonidachas passel. So again, it's a repetition of what we learned about lulav. So we're talking about an avodah zarah tree. Niktam rosho, if it's chopped off the top. If it's to olive, or the leaves were removed. Oshayu anov. Oh, this is a new chiddush. Oh, shahayu anov of merubos mi olive. I'll get back to that in the second post. In miaton kosh. Now, many of them first want to know, why did the Mishnah have to bother going through the whole rigmarole again of Hadasim? Why couldn't they just start with the Mishnah Lulav and write Lulav V'chein Hadasim? So the answer they offer is because of this edition called Anavav Merubos Me'ol. This has nothing to do with any of the 4 minim except for the Hadas alone. And on the Hadas, there are these little Anavim, little grapes, berries, that's a better word, berries. Now, under certain circumstances, Gemara is going to limit this very much, but under certain circumstances, there are too many berries, the hadas is not considered beautiful. Right? What's the color of hadas? Green. The berries are black. And you have black berries on a green background. I don't know. It's not so beautiful. However,
do we use the dusting in that berry?
only green berries. But right now we're talking about black berries. But you can remove the berries. So if you have black berries, doesn't mean that that's possible. You just have to remove them. I'm going to have tomorrow's topic is going to be when are you allowed to remove them? But the mission itself says you're not allowed to remove them on Yontif itself, either because that's called Tikkun Mana, and he's violating one of the various malachos, or because since entering into the Chag, the Hadas was possible because it had more Anovim than Olim. It remains possible. Are you familiar with that concept? That's called Ichur. Again, another example of a comparison between Lulav and Karman. In Karman, if an animal becomes possible, like for example, let's say it was Yotze, they took it out of the Azara, then even if you bring it back, it remains possible. That's called Dichui. Dichui means once rejected, always rejected.
Because you're inside the Chag already?
So it could be that once you're inside the Chag and you haven't removed the berries before the Chag on Erev Yom Tov, you're already disqualified the Hadassim, and Yesh Dichui means that's irreversible. You can't take a Chefta Shal Mitzvah and be machshir it once it's possible, like a psul is chal, like in the inherent, in the essence, the fiber of the Chefta Shal Mitzvah. So that's a gigantic sugya that appears all over the place. It's called Yesh Dichui mitzvahs or Ein Dichui mitzvahs. Do we compare mitzvahs to karma or we do not? And this is the address. Tomorrow's the address. What do we learn to the Brisa? Anaf eitz avos. Okay, this is the Torah's language for Hadassah. But the Gemara is going to question, how do you know it's referring to Hadassah? But the Brisa tells Anaf of chofin es eitza. So these leaves, right, the round leaves of a hadass, they completely cover the stem itself. The Ezahu have the Omer Zahadas. Where do you find in the agriculture, in the vegetational universe, a phenomenon in which the leaves completely cover the stem? That is Hadas. So the Gemara has to be Ema Zesa. If you take a look at a branch of an olive tree, you'll see something very similar. The olive branch is covered by long-grown leaves. Rashi has a whole description of these leaves. They're very bushy, they're very thick. So why can't an olive branch fit your description of Anaf Eitz Avos? Imagine Rabbi say taking an olive branch as Hadas, one of the four meanings. You know, the peace pacifists would be very happy now. You know, they're going to mention that Rosh Yerusha who came to the United Nations, you know what I mean? And he had all his, and no, he had all his bullets. You remember? He was the chief terrorist. I mean, he was responsible, for the death. But in one hand, he was holding an olive branch. You don't remember that? There was a famous picture when they let him into the United Nations.
I don't know.
No, that's true. I was just thinking of that. Anyway, the Gemara answers, "Be'inan avos olek." When an olive branch is lacking, is called avos. If you take a look at Rashi, it's about 15 lines up before the end of the page. Avos is Masechet sharsheres. You know, a sharsheres is a chain. Yeah. If you have a chain, then each part of the chain links into the other. Mukavim zel zeh. In other words, the leaves are climbing one on top of the other. And that's not true in the case of an olive branch. It's only true in the case of Hadas. But the Gemara has to be a dulva. Now here we don't know what a dulva is. Rashi claims, if you take a look at Rashi, eitz armon. Anybody know what an armon is? Yeah, you'll see it in Rashi in Old French. One of the rare occasions I understand the Old French. Yeah. So it's a chestnut. Oluahu, Rashi says that it is braided, and therefore it fulfills the requirement of avos. Tosfos says that Rashi doesn't know what he's talking about. Take a look at Tosfos Dibur Maskil Dulva. The Omer Rabbeinu Tam in the last line, the Ein Zeh Kuchtir She'eino Kol Hua. He says it's not braided. So we're gonna have to take a chestnut and a chestnut tree or branch and bring it in. Show and tell, we used to call it. Remember that?
Yeah.
So the Gemara says, "Be'inan enough of chofen es eitzo v'leka." You know, even though it could be that Rashi's right to some extent, they're braided in the chestnut, but not enough. The ema hirduf. What about a hirduf branch? Okay, everybody knows what a hirduf branch is, except for me, I guess. But anyway, it has dense braided leaves. Rashi says, if you take a look at Rashi hirduf, kimin kliya suyiro. And now the Gemara gives two answers. Amar Abai Drochel Darchi Noam V'Leka. Rav Amar Mihochla Emes Vasholom Ehov. So if you'll notice, Abaye quotes a pasuk in Mishle, whereas Rava quotes a pasuk in Zechariah Novi. Rashi thinks that these are two interpretations of why Hirduf is excluded. And Rashi says that Drochel Noah means it's got these thorns, these coats in it, if you take a look at Rashi. And Rava's pasuk is Shu Asui L'Sama Mavos, it's poisonous. And once again, if you look at Tosfos Maskil Emes Vashol Mahavu, he thinks Rashi is off the beaten path. And basically, Abaye and Rava are saying exactly the same thing. They're just quoting two different psukim. They're both referring to the fact that Hirduf has these thorns, and it's not Drochel Darchino, it's not Shalom.
You can't use something for mitzvah
It violates Drochel
that
Darchino.
has some violence in it, like
Right.
thorns.
Right. It's interesting because we don't have time for this, but Meir Simcha Mitvinsk at the beginning of his commentary on the Torah says that the reason why women are not obligated to give birth to children, that's only the man is obligated, is because Drochel Darchino. Because for her to put her life into danger, I mean, today, I don't know, but whatever. We learned in the Brisa, like this is the description of the Hadas, of Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Anaf Eitz Ovus Eitz Shetan Eitzo Uperiod Shava Vahavi Omer Zadas. This quote of Rabbi Eliezer, according to Ritva, is a mistake. It doesn't make any sense because you can't say that the taste of the stem and the taste of the, or if you want, the taste of the stem and the taste of the berries are the same. They're not at all similar. And this description was borrowed from Esrog, and somehow it crept in over here. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Eitz Avos Kasher, V'She'eno Avos Pasul. Hechi Dami Avos means braided. The Gemara answers on Rabbi Yehuda, that at every level there are three leaves that come out from exactly the same place. Rav Kahana Amar no, afilu trei v'chad. It's enough you have two leaves coming from the same place and another leaf which is either above or below. Rav Acha brei the Rava mahadar trei v'chad. Rav Acha was happy if there were two. Hoil v'nofik mipumya to Rav Kahana. Now, what it says mahadar means he dafka wanted two and one, which is very strange. Why not go for the jackpot? Get three. But the answer is since he heard from his Rebbe, Rav Kahana, those words that this is kosher, he would rather use and demonstrate that that's kosher. This is sugya, by the way, in brachas about how motzi lechem in oritz, but they say motzi lechem or ha-motzi. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Anyway, Amalei Mar, Barava Meimar, Luravashi. Abba Lahu Hadash Shotek. My father, Amemar, used to call that Hadas, where the leaves are not coming out at the same point, a Hadash Shotek. Rabbanon, Notru Rov Olav, Nishtar Yubo, Mute. If most of the leaves of Hadas fell off, but you still have something left, even though it's the minority, kosher. As long as there is some braided characteristic to this hadas, meaning at some point the leaves climb up one on top of the other, like braids, like a sharsheret is Rashi. Things like this price contradicts itself, ratio to the sefer. Amrit Noshru Rov Olav Kosher. He says, Cayman did not really trade. He says that what you're left with is just 2 leaves. It seems like Noshru Rov Olav Kosher. And all you have to have left is 1 level that has 2 leaves to it. How can you have ovals? Rabbi Mishkachasle, you can find it on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. The Asa Mitzrah, and the case of an Asa Mitzrah is a unique kind of Egyptian Hadas. The Kaim is Shiva B'chad Kino. It has as many as 7 leaves on each level coming out of the same point in the stem. And that means that even if the majority would have fallen off, which means that you're left with only 3 out of 7, that's what you're left with because 4 fell off. Nevertheless, you can still have avos because they can climb one on top of the other, because now we got the magic number 3. Amar Abaye, and this will pick up in Mirz Hashem. Okay then? We're stopping here on the top of Lamed Gimel.
In a very short way why you could have thing of Amma could be 5 or 6. Things is very bizarre. You wouldn't know what it is.
Right. The honest truth is we'd have to go through this in Erevin. I'm not going to promise you I have time for that. It's just my schedule is like crazy. But if you open up a Gemara in Erevin, Gimel Amud Aleph.
Yeah.
If you can do the work for me, I can't do all the work myself. I need your help. You'll see. I'm not sure if they each had a derivation. I don't remember. It's